think we're good to get started. Everybody, welcome. I see that we have a good amount of people that have come in, and I think we can get started. And so welcome to everybody. My name is Matt Erickson. I am the resident financial planning practice resource for Gays with Kids. I've been working with the organization as a way for prospective parents, parents that are currently in families, and just pretty much all the different stages of family building to act as a resource for financial planning. To give a little bit of background on me, just so you know who I am, where I'm coming from, and what all this is. So I'm a financial advisor. I have my own comprehensive financial planning practice. I'm with the firm Northwestern Mutual Park Avenue in New York City. My practice is national, but I'm based in New York City in terms of where my office is, which is where I am right now, and also where the kind of beginnings of everything with the practice started. When I say a comprehensive planner, as an integrated and comprehensive planner, what I do is I'm with people through life. And so we look at the short-term goals, the midterm goals, and the long-term goals, and essentially how do we bridge across these together over time. Now, things that fall into these categories are things like risk management, which is life insurance, disability insurance, annuities, things like that. Growth, which is investing, portfolio management, advisory, and brokerage. Retirement planning, tax efficiency when accessing funds, goal mapping, debt reduction strategies, and long-term care planning. That's in general what I do. The other side of it, so when I started my practice, I was also, when I began, the first ever openly gay advisor at my firm. We do see that there is, and it's getting better, especially in my firm. It's really changed a lot since I started, but finance really does have a big tendency towards leaning towards straight, white, cisgender men in my position. And so when I started my practice, I wanted to then say, okay, well, what does this mean for my community? And so my practice is LGBTQ plus people of color and women, professionals that are in worlds that are not customarily maybe in the standard that is a community being approached about next level of financial planning, or feeling like it's accessible in reverse, or feeling comfortable talking about it. I also specialize in financial planning for people who are HIV positive. The positive community is a specialization for me because of anything that gets medically underwritten still has some hoops to get jumped through, and so I help navigate that. I do a lot of work in the transgender, non-binary spaces, and then obviously gay adoption, surrogacy, and IVF planning. So today we're going to jump into kind of financial planning 101. And I have a bit of a presentation we'll go through, and really what it boils down to is we're going to talk about a lot of organization, a lot of ways of identifying goals. And after we're done with this, tomorrow, expect an email from myself and Joshua, who I'd like to introduce now also. Joshua is my practice manager. He handles a lot of the logistics and all of the things like my calendar, things like logistics with all this. So I wanted to give him an opportunity to say hello as well. He's waving.
Hello, everyone.
There you go. And so with that, expect an email from us also, because I'm going to send you over some materials that are going to be helpful either as the conclusion for the work that you're working on today, or also to then bring to the next session of this, which will be happening as a follow-up, which we're calling, Financial Planning 201, kind of like the sophomore class after, finishing your freshman year. And going into that, if we want to have that then be what is the bridge to the next session of that. And I just want to double check, which is on Tuesday, the 24th. So a week from today at the same time. I also am going to be offering for all of you the ability to meet with me one-on-one. A lot of financial planning, we're going to go over some basics, but is very, very individualized and should really be unique also to your current situation. And so please, when we do email, you'll have our information, everything. Let's get on the calendar also and have at least like a 1-hour session together where we do some one-on-one talking. So that's me kind of talking about myself, the process. So let's jump into the material. But before I do that, and you can use the chat or raise your hand or things like that, any questions or anything that you want to say up front right now, anything, just toss it into the chat while we get everything switched over. And Joshua will also be monitoring the chat as we go through the process. So please feel free to throw any questions or things that pop up in there as well, and he'll stop me. Okay. Okay, so financial planning. So some of the basics that we're going to go over are, we're going to talk about this idea of these kind of 5 key actions. We're going to think about ideas of saving, spending, growing, protecting, and eventually giving in a lot of cases, especially with our community. They're also beyond anything when it comes to things that are legacy based or things that are, growing throughout life. What does that mean when it comes to possibly the connection to something like a not-for-profit? How do we also create estate planning where it is going to be something that is for a cause as well as our loved ones? That becomes kind of the final of the 5, but our big focus is going to be saving, spending, growing, and protecting. I think we have a question. I believe they have a recording of the PowerPoint will be up on Gaze with Kids site. I know there was a question about that. Okay. So saving. Let's first talk about, okay, what does it mean when it comes to the idea of saving? Savings is going to come into a couple different categories. One being goal-based savings, and also one being savings that's set aside for an emergency. And so how much should you be saving? So when we look at, and this is pretty much a kind of generalized rule of thinking about 20% of your gross income being something that on an annual basis is being used to various sources of savings. Now, that means savings account, that means your retirement, that means putting things into an investment account, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is a very generalized way of looking at saving, but if you want to use 20% as your kind of your guide, it will hopefully be helpful to start to see, okay, does that fit into your overall picture? If it doesn't, and it feels like, wow, that's really difficult to be able to put away 20%, that's then where we then maybe take a look at the category of spend. Is the budget being handled in a way that's going to be most advantageous to you? A lot of times when it comes to budget and when it comes to, okay, how am I spending money? A lot of times the hardest part and the most beneficial part is literally just sitting down with it and addressing what you're spending. I'm going to send after this a blank budget sheet for all of you to use, and it has categories in it, and play with it. See what you're spending each month. Take all judgment out of it. If you are, and this does not necessarily pertain to everybody, but if you are someone that is spending money or feels uncomfortable about the topic of money, or there becomes this kind of background noise in our heads about the shoulds and, oh, I'm spending this, I don't want to look at it, blah, blah, blah. Take that out of your head. It's really, let's look at math. Let's look at the numbers. And then from there, we can build something that is really individualized and making sure that you're getting what you want. It's sometimes difficult to think farther in the future, but to be able to have things in the future that we want, you really need to begin planning as soon as possible, because it will exponentially work in your favor the sooner you start. Something to understand about savings and time. So when we break down the time horizon of how much time we have between when we put money into something and when we take it back out, when we start talking about growth, that topic's going to come into the conversation. So goal setting and understanding what money is going where is going to be helpful when organizing, and it will also help make things a lot more manageable because we know exactly what money is going for where, what it's there for. So I'm going to also send you a little bit of a goal sheet after this to play with. Okay, what is a short-term goal? When we think short-term goals, those are 0 to 3 years. 4 to 10 are midterm goals. 10 plus are long-term goals. So show of hands, I think it'll let us do this. How many of you have an emergency fund? Good. Good. A lot of hands going up. Good. And for those, there's a good amount of hands going up. And then there's also, for the majority of people on the call, definitely the majority is that there isn't an emergency fund. So let's talk about what an emergency fund is. So, and this is a good statistic, right? 39% of all Americans wouldn't be able to cover an unexpected emergency expense without using a credit card or borrowing money. So emergency funds, first and foremost, one of the categories is, okay, if we look at risk and we look at how to minimize risk. The things that fall into that category are things like an emergency fund, life insurance, disability insurance, et cetera. Those really act as foundations of really strong financial plans. Emergency funds should be between 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. Now, some schools of thought say 3 to 6 months of your non-discretionary living expenses. Non-discretionary means things you have to pay, not things you want to pay. Knowing that 3 to 6 months is there, God forbid something happens, you can grab it, it's immediately liquid. That means a savings account. I am a big fan of high yield savings accounts. They're very good right now because they're based on the federal funds rate. And the federal funds rate for, I think recently, is at about 3.3% interest on a high yield savings account. So I do recommend, if you are looking to start your emergency fund or get things separated and kind of organized into a place for your emergency fund, take a look at high yield savings accounts, Google it, and just do your research, look at all the different companies that have options for that and see that 3.3 interest is a lot better than, say, a bank savings account that has 0.03 interest. That's all well and good. It's not going to make you do cartwheels, but at the same time, it acts as an online account that you kind of can set and forget and have it do its thing, and then not have this temptation where it's connected to your checking account. And then we start getting muddy with our water about what is this money allowed to be used for. It really should be there for an emergency. Once you get to your goal of 3 to 6 months of whatever that might be, and when we sit and talk together, we can figure out what that amount is. Once you get to that, though, we want to make sure we don't keep stuffing money into a savings account. Here's the thing. Savings accounts don't keep up with inflation. On average, inflation is about 3%. So if an account is not keeping up with a 3% interest growth to it, it's actually losing value while it's hanging out in there. That is fine when it comes to something as a trade-off for emergency money, but to a point. So then what do we do when we get to the point where, okay, that's filled and now we have money still coming in? Where do we put it? The next question is, okay, well, what is it for? How do we then get it to grow or work more for us, where it might be going into something that is invested or something that is more growth oriented and less about maintaining the principal? So 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. Any questions so far? Now, looking at spending, how many of you keep track of all your expenses every month? Three, four. Good. It's hard, right? And so I think the budget I'm going to send will be helpful with this. It's good to then, once you start figuring out what money is coming in and what's going out, you'll begin to see, okay, of this money coming in and what's being spent, how much am I intentionally spending? How much of it is discretionary spending, i.e., I don't need that, I want it, so I'm just gonna go get it. Or how much of it is non-discretionary, where it's, the mortgage or the rent, your food, things like that, we got to eat. Of that, starting to see and break down categorically, where are we spending money? And then where is there money possibly being spent or leaving our accounts that we didn't realize was happening? I call that bleeding money. It's very common. Half the time, it just takes a second of looking at it to start correcting that. And then once that starts to get figured out budget-wise, we can start to see what predictability there is of what's left over every month. Financial planning is about predictability. How do you get boring and predictable, where we know how much money is happening all the time, what it's going for? We start having to not really stress or think about things because a professional's taking over and it's being all handled and looked at in a way where, okay, if this is regularly what I have left over, what do I do with it? And how do I begin to pay myself like a bill? We should look at as ourselves in terms of our planning as a bill. You're due, it's owed to you every month, and where you put it is like paying a bill and should be looked at in the same kind of gravity. And so as you begin to figure out, okay, if this amount's going to retirement accounts and this one's going into an investment account and this one's going into my savings account, et cetera, when we start to carve out how much money is available to break up into those pieces, really making sure that we create something that is repeatable and something that is habitual, and in a lot of ways, when doable, automatic. So we start to not even think about it and we forget about it. And then we turn and look like, oh, great, all these systems are in place to really be helping us build what we're wanting over the longer term of life, as well as the things that we want during life. I always tell people when it comes to spending and saving, try to take any negativisms out of your head when it comes to saving or not purchasing something and attach it to a goal. So what I mean by that is when we think about, okay, how to handle our budgets, spend maybe less on certain things so we can put money away here, it's not about depriving yourself of something you want. It's about asking yourself if these dollars, let's say it's $10, will be really, really simple. Let's say $10 to get a flat white I'm in New York, so to get a flat white at Starbucks and a cookie, okay? I love that. On that day, when I go to get that $10 can either go to that or can go to something that's more goal focused, where if that $10 is going, let's say, toward my down payment fund for my home. Now I know $10 is a low number, but I'm using it as an example. I'm also using it as an example also, though, because of the fact that sometimes those $10 happen a lot throughout the week and they add up. And so that thinking of it is this way is like, okay, do I want that latte? Is it, or that flat white? Is it more important to me that $10 purchased me for that moment, or the achievement of this down payment fund, the excitement of that going towards that, does that outweigh what I'm spending to get the flat white? If the answer is no, get the flat white, you're having a day. But if the answer is like, oh no, I should maybe make coffee at home because that $10 can go to something way more exciting, then do that. Find the positives of saving. I want to make sure that we create systems where you're not punishing yourself. It's just like dieting. It's just like going to the gym. If it becomes something that is a negative, it's hard to keep it. It's hard to keep the habit, and it's hard to keep the results happening once you've achieved them too, because it's easy to backslide. And so finding ways with money to take some of the guesswork out of it, to take negativisms out of saving and budgeting and make it about something that's positive and goal focused. And also finding systems that you can put into automatic drive so that you're not having to think about it. The more and more, it takes a few months, it might hurt in the beginning, but you'll begin to not even think about it as this money starts leaving and it's just doing its thing. When you're working with a professional, if you are working with me, for instance, I do annual reviews with my clients to check in on things, and that's when we reassess and see what's going on. And so ongoing, lifelong thing. Financial planning is not going to happen overnight. If it did, it's probably a very messy plan. And so be patient with yourselves if this is the beginning stages of you financially planning. And if this is something that you've been doing for a while and you're getting new ideas and things like that, you know also that implementing things one at a time, you work your way down the list. It's a lifelong journey, making sure you're hitting your goal points along the way. Okay, so essentials kind of breaking down to 60%, discretionary, things that are fun, another 20%. And so savings and discretionary you see are kind of equal in some ways. You might tilt one more in the way of the other. But when you think of it in these terms, right, if I'm going to save X amount and then also reward myself in the kind of same capacity, that's a good balance. That's a good trade-off. Just making sure that this number here, we want to make sure does not get out of control, because this number is the part that is, if it's essential and non-discretionary, we can't get it lower because of the fact that it has to be paid. We can pull back on eating out. We can pull back on buying clothes. In some cases, if we're young and we need to pull back on certain things when it comes to saving, but we can't pull back on non-discretionary because it's locked, it's set what it is. And so we just want to make sure that that number isn't so high that it leaves no room for the other two, because then we're in a little bit of a danger zone. And that's what's going to lead towards, okay, I have to start using credit cards constantly because being able to make ends meet and have super, super high essential expenses, that's the thing that people run into. That's the problem. I think a lot of people think that from budgeting, they hit their hardest points when it comes to things that they are spending money on that are maybe discretionary. But I think the hardest part is to correct something when, for instance, you have an apartment that is out of your budget. For instance, your rent is too high, you can't afford it, you're stuck. So how do we deal with that? And a lot of that is trying to plan ahead, but some of us have made these decisions already, right? And so in terms of that, taking a look and making sure that things are in order with the amount that's coming in and what's going out. Now grow. So when we grow money, we think of it this way, okay? So the growth of money and looking at investments, the sooner you start, the better. Even if it's putting $100 away, it's do something, because the sooner you start, the better. And it's because of the law of compounding numbers. So when you look at the growth of an investment or the growth of something that's dividend based, what happens is if you say, oh, look, this account gains 8% compounding, right? We'll see that on a statement. We'll hear someone say that, but what does that mean, right? It does not mean that if you put $1,000 in today, 10 years from now, it's 8% higher. It's compounding. And so each year it gains on average 8%. So that number has gone up, and then 8% of 8% of 8% compounds. And so when you look at how investments grow, the longer they're in there, they exponentially grow. It's not a straight line. So keeping that in mind, this is something that kind of shows that in a graphic way in terms of the difference from starting at 25, 35, 45. Now start where you are. Don't think that it's too late either. But if you're able to start doing something, it really does make a difference because of the idea of compounding. Now, next, okay, what kind of investments do we do, right? So when I am working with clients, I'm an integrated planner. I integrate a suite of different things, including insurance and life insurance and cash value growth and dividend and tax sheltering, all these things. When it comes to growth, the timeline is really important. If something is less than 3 years from now, the money going less than 2 years from now, 3 years right now, maybe, you don't want to really put it into anything in the market quite aggressive, because the fact that we never want to put money into an account that runs the risk of having less money in it from when we started, and now we need to pull the money out. How many of you, by shows of hands, have investment accounts? Great. Good. That's a good amount of you. Now with that, how many of you use something that is like a robot, robo-advisor, or like a robotic platform, things like Robinhood or E-Trade or things like that? Or just checking with how many are using that investing? Great. Okay. Okay, perfect. So when we look then at investing and kind of taking things to the next level when working from an advisory standpoint, diversification means that we take our dollars and we break them up across a bunch of different asset allocation classes. So where if we put things all into an individual stock or into an individual, what was that?
We have a question. Does a 401k count as an investment account?
Yep. Yes, it does. 401ks are investment accounts. Most 401ks are invested in a mutual fund or a target date fund, an individual one. The way those work is they start out quite aggressive, because the longer we have investing, we can be more aggressive with the money. The kind of rule of thumb when we look at the market, it is on average up 70 to 80% of the time, down 20 to 30% of the time-ish. We don't know when, though. We do know, though, in long cycles that tends to be what we see. And so if we have something that's going to be in there for quite some time, like a 401k, right? We're not going to touch it till we're 59 and a half and hitting our retirement age and maybe later. We know that we can be really aggressive with it. 401ks, if they're in a target date fund, auto rebalance themselves as you get closer to retirement age. That's the target date of target date 2050, for instance. The year 2050 is what it's targeting as your retirement. As it gets closer to that, it gets more conservative because you're getting it off the roller coaster of the ups and downs of the market. Those are great for 401ks. They're kind of autopilot. When you start getting into financial planning and start mixing your assets and how you're diversifying your planning, there are other ways to use that. That's a really good way of investing through a work-sponsored plan. How many of you have 401ks, 403bs, anything that's a retirement account through work?
And that also includes the SEP, which that was a question. Are SEP IRAs considered investment accounts as well?
Yep, they are. And SEP IRAs are definitely investment accounts also. Those are tending to be diversified a little bit more because they tend to be in more than one mutual fund or ETFs and things like that. For those of you that aren't familiar with what a SEP IRA is, SEP IRAs are for people who have their own companies, are self-employed, or creating a pension for themselves and any employees that they have. What's nice about them is you have a much, much higher limit of how much money you can put away for retirement per year, and you're essentially creating a pension for yourself. Yeah, they're very good they're really great for tax deductions and as well, and ways of kind of maximizing your taxable versus non-taxable income. 401ks, SEP IRAs, traditional IRAs, these are called qualified accounts. What that means is they are qualified in that they have tax treatment to them that is beneficial in the moment. And so a 401k, a 403b is pre-tax, right? Because it's coming out of your check, your paycheck, and going into this before the taxes have been taken out of it. So it grows tax deferred until it's time to start using the money that you're taking out for your income at whatever age/tax bracket you're in retirement. And then it's charged tax at your income tax bracket. What's great about that is that the more money that's in there, because it's the tax hasn't been taken out, it's growing more. And also we tend to be in lower tax brackets in retirement than we are during our working years. Now, traditional IRAs, SEP IRAs, things like that are tax deductible. Same thing, they're qualified, but you can deduct these taxes and it's a tax benefit at the end of your year. Roth dollars are the opposite. So Roth, when it comes, I know we're kind of sliding into retirement, but it's good to just touch on this. Roth dollars, Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks are paid with after-tax dollars. And so for those, you've already paid the taxes on it. Either it's coming out of your checking account or they've already taken the tax out of it. If it's a Roth 401k coming out of your check, they grow, you've already paid the taxes on it. And in most cases, when utilized properly, you don't have to pay income tax on them when you take it out in retirement. Roth IRAs have a lot of restrictions when it comes to your income. There are other things that are very similar to use that we can talk about when we get a little deeper into things or talking one-on-one that act in the same way. And what you're doing is you're really diversifying your retirement. Where are you going to create buckets of money essentially that are cash to create an income for yourself so you're not dependent on the income from your job, or are less dependent on an income from your job where it's maybe you're pulling back and doing something that's more passion-based or whatever it might be. And you factor Social Security and things like that into that as well. So yes, those are 100% investment accounts. All of those things are invested. And then obviously, of course, individual portfolios. So any other questions about investments? Like anything about an account being an investment or anything like that? Cool. So the reason to start early, here's another concept. So when it comes to investing, it's good to start something that's recurring. This is called dollar cost averaging. So when you're investing, if you put the same amount of money into an investment account every month, what that means is that those dollars are buying differing amounts of, let's say, equities, for our case, the stocks. So those stocks are going to individually be worth more or worth less. And so that same amount of money is going to buy a different amount of things each month, right? Now, like we said, right, over the long term, up more than down. So if you're doing that, you're getting every best month and every worst month and not trying to time the market. Are there people that time the market? Sure. I consider that something that's called speculative investing. It's not the type of investment advisor I am. I'm a comprehensive one. I'm putting people's lives together. We put together diversified portfolios. Can you do that? Sure. If you want it as a hobby, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just be very conscious about the purpose behind it. And if that is something that you do like, I don't discourage it, but I do very much encourage certain things that are a little bit more tried and true. Also, if you are looking at putting together very specific like life goals and creating pictures of your financial security through life, those kind of can fit together, but it would be a portion of it. I feel the same way because it's going to come up, I'm sure, and I get asked it all the time, cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency, in my opinion, is more of a hobby. Be prepared that if the money you're putting into it, you're able and don't mind losing all of it. Might be great, might not be. I don't think there's anything wrong. I have crypto. It's not that I don't, but it's not a part of my planning. That's speculative. And so that's the kind of breakdown of how I look at investing. And so when you do start doing an investment portfolio that is maybe not retirement, understanding your risk tolerance is the next part. And understanding risk tolerance, what does that mean? How much am I willing to withstand the ups and downs of the market, right? Investing means you are going to gain money from time to time and you are going to lose money from time to time in said account. That's the nature of investing. It's how much am I comfortable outlasting the ups and downs. Time will be a really helpful guide in that. If something's more than 10 years that you're going to put this money in, it's going to hang out for 10 years or more, you can be pretty aggressive with it. It can be a lot more in equities or stocks. And in the next session, we'll go deeper into asset allocation classes and what that means and what ones to do and why. But when you start looking at things that are longer, you can be more aggressive because we know that the cycles are up more than down again. Midterm, sometimes you maybe want to do a little bit of a mix of fixed income / bonds and stocks. But what it comes down to is doing a risk tolerance profile with a professional to figure out your score and your mix, which is what I do with people too. We'll talk more about that in the next session next week. So protect. Now, the next bit. So we've talked about save, we talked about spend, we've talked about grow, protect. So what we have going on here is great, right? We're talking about growth, we're talking about saving, all these things like that. It all doesn't really mean much if it all comes tumbling down because we haven't prepared a good, strong, protective foundation to it. Meaning, what do we do to make sure that no matter what happens to me, this continues all still happening, all the funding still goes where it's supposed to, my family and now your growing family is protected. What does that mean? How much? What do I do? So let's talk about risk management now. So one of the things that always comes into mind is that we need to think about your income as an asset. Your greatest asset is your ability to earn an income. It's not your house, it's not your car, it's your ability to earn an income. Because think of it this way. If you take your annual income, right, whatever that might be, and you multiply it across the years between now and when you're going to retire, getting that big number, and then adjusting it annually, let's say conservatively by like 2.5% every year of growth of your income, that number is big when it comes to thinking of it as an asset. One of my mentors once joked about if you had so let's say in 30 years, $120,000 a year could equal $4 million. If you had an ATM in the middle of your living room that had $4 million in it, you'd insure it to make sure that everything was okay, that $4 million asset's good to go no matter what. Your income is that. It's just not tangible. So it's hard for us sometimes to think of it in those terms. So what happens if you're sick or injured or something mentally comes up that stops you from doing the day-to-day duties of your profession? You need to make sure that your income remains virtually unchanged so that either you can get back to work or, God forbid, if it is something that is going to be taking you out until you would retire, it's still giving you the same income throughout life so that you can still continue to put money towards your retirement and your investing and things like that. That's called disability insurance. It's something to look into. A lot of you probably have it at work, but the thing with work is they tend to more often than not cover either 50 or 60% of your income, which is great. Always elect that in your time of benefits because either they're paying for it and you don't have to, or it's very cheap. And what happens is literally 60% of your income comes to you if you have a long-term disabling event that prevents you from going to work. Be aware, statistically, it's not injury. I mean, of course, injury is a part of it, but I think we hear disability and we think, oh, I broke my legs, I got hit by a car, I'm in a wheelchair, blah, blah, blah. It's illness that really gets people. And a lot of times it's not for the rest of life. On average, when they do the kind of actuarial tables on it, on average, it's about 4 years. And so when someone's out of work for 4 years, they get back to it, but you're making sure that your income keeps coming in. It's just insurance. Is it exciting? Is it sexy like investing? No, but it's really important. And it's a part of the conversation. Maybe you don't find investing sexy. I find investing sexy. I'm also a little bit of a nerd for some of the things you can do with insurance. So disability, thinking about that, understanding more how to protect and make sure that everything keeps coming in. Because also there's people dependent on the bills getting paid, right? The thing is that 60% doesn't cover your entire income, right? So there's some sort of delta missing. If your job is paying the premiums on also, there's a tax implication to it. When you get the benefit, they get the tax write-offs for it. But if you have your own that you connect to it, you can do that where it fills in the rest and it's yours. And it doesn't matter what job you're at, it comes with you. Your work one is a group policy. What that means is it's owned by your employer. So you're a certificate holder. It doesn't come with you if you change jobs, other words. And so something to think about is, okay, well, how do I then do income protection? And that's called disability insurance. It's something to discuss. It's something I do with clients. If you are meeting with me, we'll talk about it further if needed. That I'll show you how to get it and all that good stuff. All right, I want to take a pause before we get into not-for-profit things and such. The other thing is life insurance. So life insurance, it comes to the same thing, right? A lot of us have life insurance through work. It's usually 1 or 2 times our salary, which is not enough, right? If something happens, again, if we think about our income at the very least, from where we are now until retirement, whoever's depending on that portion going towards bills or whatever it might be, that amount of money is how you figure out how much life insurance you should have, as well as debts and things like that. Cool thing is though, life insurance doesn't have to just be about a death benefit. You can use life insurance in really creative ways to build equity and to do tax sheltered dividend growth and cash value that you can use while you're alive, and also create systems that will help you if you ever need things like long-term care planning, going into a nursing home, things like that, where there are riders that can flip it and you can use it to pay for that. Life insurance is a much more complex conversation than simply, oh, I have a death benefit, that's my life insurance, probably won't use it, I'm glad I didn't use it because I didn't die. There are ways to convert that and make it permanent and do all of these things and shelter cash from taxes because it's being used in a loan source for yourself. I do a whole class just on that, so we're not going to go super deep into that, but just understand that risk management plays a big part in a financial plan that's stable and secure, but also one that has multiple avenues to pull money from that have different tax implications to them and also different implications of what the market is doing. So I'm gonna pause for a second. Any questions so far? And then I'm gonna open it up and we can do a little bit of discussing stuff, and also I'll do a little bit on anything that's legacy planning. Any questions or anything you want to talk about? Anything that I didn't cover yet that you were hoping we would? Okay. Okay, and so then the final bit being depending on where you are in life and how you want to create your estate planning will become another part of your overall conversation with yourself about, okay, well, what is the purpose of what's being left, whether it is to children, whether it is to a spouse, what happens if we both then pass, who does it go to, etc. Everything you do, including investments, are able to be left to a not-for-profit. I'm gonna pause for a second because I saw some questions.
What is an appropriate age to start looking into life insurance?
So it may surprise you, the sooner the better. The younger you are, the less expensive it is, less costly, I should say. I don't like using the word expensive because it is something that has a very important purpose to it. It's less costly the younger you are. When you do life insurance also, you lock in your age and your health at the time of approval, meaning that age we'll talk about in a second, but health-wise, you've locked in where you are at that time. And we tend to be the youngest and the healthiest we are in this moment, right? We're not going to get younger, obviously, but for the most part, most of us are the healthiest will be too. So if you lock that in now, no matter what happens, it can't affect your policy. And so I do recommend looking into life insurance at a young age, because the other thing is, like, when you work with a professional, what I do with people, when you're young and you get a term policy, for instance, which is really, you get a lot of death benefit for a low cost per month when you're young. When you lock that in, what you can do is something called converting, where what I do with people is I convert little chunks of their term over to permanent over time throughout their lives, so that by the time we even get close to retirement, they no longer have term. It's all become permanent, and we make cash value start growing in it. But you start somewhere so you can lock it in. And it's not a lot. It's not very costly, especially if you're young. And so I would say definitely we should talk. I can show you like what the cost benefit is, and doing it sooner than later is good because you can use it for your planning too. And then I also see there's another one about high yield savings accounts, right?
Yep. And I was going to put in the chat that like we recommend, they're all pretty similar. They're all based off of the Fed. We typically say Marcus and Ally are two great ones, but they're all pretty comparable.
Yeah. So Marcus by Goldman Sachs is a good one. Ally Bank has a great one. I can't legally give you an individual one that I recommend. That's just a law thing with the SEC and FINRA, but I have to give you at least two examples. Marcus by Goldman Sachs is a good example, Ally. But if you do high yield savings accounts into Google and kind of read through them and see what you like, they're pretty comparable, like what Joshua was saying, because of the federal funds rate being how they determine the interest rate on them. They tend to be pretty comparable to one another. And so if there is a name that you trust and you like and you see, it might even be that it's something that like your credit card's through, or something that is like a bank account that you have. I just recommend, when it comes to an emergency fund, keep it on its own. Set it, forget it. Once you hit your amount, stop putting money into it, because again, remember, inflation is making it lose value. If that money is also needing to go towards something that's a short-term goal, have it be its own savings account that is for that. So let's say you're putting away cash for a down payment for a house, right? I help people buy their homes all the time. So with the down payment, right, as you're putting money away, have a down payment savings account. It can be still with the same high yield savings account. They will let you create separate ones under the umbrella of the high yield savings, so you can categorize what everything is. If you know who Marie Kondo is, I joke around that, like, Marie Kondo your finances. Get really, really specific about what money's where, so that you really know what goals you're approaching and what ones you may have to lean into. Trying to do the math of one great big savings account is a lot. It's a lot to deal with, and you breaking it up into separate places will help. That's to say, if that down payment is going to be needed in the next 2 years. Now, if you're saving for a home and you're going to want to start putting money away, and it's not going to be 5, 6, 7 years until then, that's money you probably want to put into something more growth focused, so you can gain money on it as well as put money away. And so in those, you start to look at things that are portfolios of some sort, or mutual funds of some sort, that have a mix that maybe isn't all stocks, but there's maybe half and half bonds and stocks, and then breaking those down. Working with an investment person on that, we can talk about it too, is the way to go, because it'll help you again with your risk tolerance. But I'm very, like, even for your liquid savings accounts, break them into individual ones. Then the emergency fund, set it, forget it. Maybe one's a vacation fund, maybe one is, a car fund, whatever it might be. The more specific and organized you get, it'll make your life way, way better. What other questions do we have? Okay. So just to now review, we're looking at saving. You're going to be receiving materials from us about budget, goal setting, things like that. And when you receive it, we can set a time to get together then one-on-one on the calendar, or if we're going to the next session, that's again next Tuesday, same time, the 24th, where it'll be the next stage, kind of further digging into some of these topics. But saving, how do you save for goals? How do we then identify and at least create some flag points? Now, I always also remember and try to remind people, your priorities are going to shift over time. Your finances will ebb and flow, all of that. So these goals are going to probably change too, but having some sort of roadmap to start helps get it on track and moving towards it. And then you adapt it along the way like a kind of living document. Okay, so saving, spending, how to look at your budget, break it down, and make sure that we're looking at what's discretionary and non-discretionary. What is being used for saving and what is being used intentionally. And then when it comes to spending, is there something that's happening that is a impulse buying? Is there something where money's leaking or bleeding where you didn't realize it was? So that's save, spend. I'm gonna take a quick break because I see a question popped up. Yep.
Yeah. Do you recommend education savings account?
So when it comes to education, so here's a couple things to bear in mind. First is that retirement, you cannot take out loans for retirement, right? But you can for education. So I really urge parents to really make sure that your retirement and your saving and all of your growth and things like that are in order before starting necessarily education accounts, because you can handle, I know we hate student loans, but student loans actually are good debt, as much as it hates and pains me to say it, because they're low interest rate debt. Mortgages, student loans, in a lot of cases, car loans, things like that. Those are good debt vehicles. They build your credit and they also have low interest rates to them. Credit card debt is the bad debt, right? Because that's like 25% interest, 20% interest versus 5% interest on a student loan, 4%. And so bearing that in mind, once that's all set, doing things like a 529 plan is a good education. 529 plans are structured by the government. What they are there's tax benefits to them. It's an investment account where the money is going towards education savings. 529 plans, then when the child hits education time, as long as the money that's being pulled out is used for applicable and approvable education expenses, you don't pay tax on it. And so that's great. There's positives and negatives to it. One is that it has to be used for education. So what happens, like if something happens where there's a full scholarship or things like that, it does have to be used for that, or there's some penalties. There's also ways of creating trusts for kids. There is, and this is going a little bit into the deep end, but looking at, they're called UTMAs or UGMAs, which are trusts for children where they don't have restrictions to them as to for education, but there are other bits to them that might be advantageous or not. And then also permanent life insurance on a child. Dividend growth becomes something that is tax sheltered and liquid. It can be used for that, or keep riding out and used for like a down payment on a home later in life or whatever it might be. And because they're so young, it compounds like crazy for dividends. So education strategies, there's a lot of things that you can weave together with your own planning as well. Good question. And I know that there's a lot to talk about with education, but one rule of thumb just being, make sure also that all the other things with financial planning are in place, because you don't want to get yourself stuck either, because then you're going to go into debt, or you're going to have to, burden your kids by living on their couch. So the burden's going to happen somewhere. And loans aren't necessarily bad. I'm a fan of loans for education and letting them just ride out on the minimums, because the money that I could have put towards that, I might put into an investment account that will gain more interest than the interest I'd be saving by paying off a student loan faster. Let's say 8% versus 5%. There's a 3% difference in there, right? Just things to keep in mind. Not all debt is bad debt. Sometimes carrying debt's pretty good and build your credit. What other questions do people have so far? Okay, so we touched on save, we touched on spend, grow, investing in ways that match your goals and your timelines and your tolerance to risk, and then protecting everything with a good foundation of risk management, emergency funds, disability insurances, life insurance, tax sheltering dollars, cash value growth, things that are not beholden to the ups and downs of the market, so that we can layer those things on top. Because if those are in place, you could be more aggressive on the other things that are in the market, because you have other sources of money when the chips are down, right? We want to hedge against that. And then giving being the bit when we get to estate planning later in life, like if we are wanting to do something to an organization, how does not-for-profit work happen? Pretty much anything in an estate can be left to a not-for-profit. And so if it becomes something that is less about going to people and more going to a cause, all of this applies as well. So that brings us to about the end of it. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to put up now. So here is my contact information. You're going to get an email from us also, so you'll see it. But This is my email address, matthew.erickson@nm.com. And then we just started a business Instagram account, which is @financial_identity. And identity is ending with an I, not a Y. That is the actual name of my company itself, which is Identity Financial. And so, yeah. Any questions as we wrap up, or any comments or anything else you want to touch base on?
I have a question. Do you have any recommendations on real estate investment and getting started in that?
So when I do real estate with people, I do mortgage-backed securities as a part of their portfolio more so. If somebody is wanting, though, to buy property and have this as a passive source of income, things like that, if that is the route you want to go, looking at your mortgage and then how does that relate to the amount of money that's coming in from the tenants, things like that. So if it's about a physical property, couple things. A, making sure you want to be a landlord, just be aware of that, and making sure that you are in a position too, that if there is a vacancy for a month or 2 months where you're trying to get a tenant in there, that you can still handle your finances without that coming in. Those are two things to really think about. Beyond that, though, I have lots of clients that are very much have real estate and have created a situation where they purchase a home and the tenant pays the mortgage essentially. And so you're creating assets. Real estate tends to be the highest volatility when it comes to asset classes. So I do put REITs and things that are real estate mortgage-backed securities and things like that. Now we're talking about like straight up investment side of things in people's portfolios. I do a little bit though. I don't do a lot. I do a lot more heavy into things that are like large cap companies, mid cap, small cap, international developed and emerging markets and things like that. Real estate sometimes is the best asset class that year. The next year it might be the worst, and then it's the best again, it's the worst. And so want to have a little bit of it because again, we don't know what the best classes are going to be from year to year, but when we start to see the cycles, we do see it's quite volatile. And so from that standpoint, I do always put it in people's portfolios, but I pepper it a little bit more so than dig super deep into it. But then when it comes to actual properties, that other part of it is remembering, do you want to be a landlord? Do you want to hire someone to be the management person on the property? Or with that, making sure that you're in a position that you've protected yourself also if the tenant is going to be vacant for a few months. It's almost like you're another emergency fund, in other words. I hope that answered the question. If it didn't, just shoot something in the chat that says, Matt, I need more. Okay, any other questions? Anything else anybody wants to talk about while we wrap up? Great. Well, this was great. I'm really, thank you for coming. And it was really great to see a really good turnout and a lot of great questions and participation with hands and things like that. And a good kind of varying level of people who have gotten started with their finances and things like that. Remember, it's never too late to start. Start as soon as you can. Again, the younger you are, the better, but it's also not too late to start either. There's always things that can be done. And so, yeah. So great to see you. I didn't really see any of you, but have a great rest of your day. And I will see a lot of you probably next week. If not, keep an eye out for emails tomorrow from Joshua or myself, and we'll continue the conversation. I'm looking forward to it. All right, everybody, have a great night.